We've arrived at one of the sharpest turning points in the history of science. Some call it the pinnacle of human discovery, the most important breakthrough that changed the world. Others call it the lowest point science has ever sunk to. In our previous video, we talked about this. Through the work of Enrico Fermi, Irene Curie, Otto Hahn, and finally Lise Meitner, humanity had achieved the unthinkable. We had split the atom. This was, in every sense, one of the most important turning points in all of history. There was an unimaginable, incomprehensible power at stake. With this power, you could elevate all of humanity to the next level, or you could wipe entire civilizations off the face of the earth. And we, humanity, would end up doing both. The incredible story of the atom continues, with scientists, with wars, with atomic bombs, and with the Manhattan Project. Whether or not an atomic bomb could actually be built now depended entirely on one thing: the neutron, and understanding how it worked. For a nuclear explosion to occur through fission, one crucial thing had to be achieved: a chain reaction. Each fission event would need to release free neutrons, and those free neutrons would need to trigger new fission events, again and again. And within a short time, through a series of experiments, scientists confirmed what many had feared and hoped: a sustained chain reaction was possible. Meanwhile, the Second World War was raging with all its destructive fury. In October 1939, Germany had invaded Poland. And immediately after, in that very same month, Albert Einstein sat down and wrote a letter to the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, a letter filled with dire warnings. As you may remember from our previous video, Einstein wrote this letter with the help of Leo Szilard, a physicist who was convinced that a nuclear weapon had to be built. And in that letter, Einstein told Roosevelt something alarming. The uranium experiments have achieved a successful chain reaction through fission. This reaction can produce an enormous amount of power. And with this enormous power, devastatingly destructive bombs can be built. Einstein went on in the letter to warn that the German government was actively conducting research in this very field, and that America absolutely must begin its own program immediately. If the Americans lost this race, if German scientists built the first atomic bomb, Hitler would not hesitate for a single moment to use this devastating weapon. At first, Roosevelt wasn't sure whether he should act on this, but reports kept flooding in from every direction. The possibility that the Nazis could develop such a weapon was a terrifying prospect. And so, shortly after, Roosevelt wrote back to Einstein with a response. We are forming a team of scientists and military representatives. Roosevelt first established the Uranium Advisory Committee, a team of scientists and military officials tasked with investigating whether uranium could actually be used as a weapon. Meanwhile, Enrico Fermi, who had emigrated to America, along with his team at the University of Chicago, achieved something extraordinary. Using uranium and graphite, they successfully carried out the first controlled and sustained nuclear chain reaction. Newspapers of the era compared this achievement to something primal. They called it the equivalent of the first human discovering fire. And with that, the atomic bomb was closer than it had ever been before. Leo Szilard once said to Fermi about this very achievement, I knew then that we had opened a dark chapter in the history of humanity. Roosevelt would later bring Enrico Fermi into the newly formed Office of Scientific Research and Development, putting one of the world's greatest nuclear physicists at the heart of the weapons program. Meanwhile, in 1941, while all of this was unfolding, Japan launched a devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, killing thousands of Americans. In response, Roosevelt declared that the United States of America was now officially entering the Second World War. Following this development, military representatives were brought into the Scientific Research Committee. The line between science and war was disappearing fast. Alongside Fermi's uranium work, scientists like Glenn Seaborg were producing pure plutonium samples. And in Canada, nuclear research was continuing at different facilities as well. And so, in order to organize all of these scattered efforts under one unified command, Roosevelt launched the Manhattan Project in December 1942. And J. Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist running nuclear fission research at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, would be appointed as the scientific director of the entire project. The Los Alamos Laboratory, also known as Project Y, would become the place where the first atomic bombs were built and tested under the Manhattan Project. And then came July 16, 1945. In a remote desert near Alamogordo, New Mexico, the first atomic bomb test, codenamed Trinity, was successfully carried out. The mushroom cloud that erupted rose more than 10 kilometers into the sky. Physicist Isaac Rabi later described that moment in his own words. Suddenly, there was a light that blinded the eyes. I had never seen anything so bright in my life, and no one ever has. Then a shock wave that passed right through your body. No, I don't believe anyone had ever witnessed anything like it. After the light, a fireball emerged. It kept rising and rising, as if signaling everything that would follow in the world from that point on. A great monster was being born. Another physicist who witnessed the test, Kenneth Bainbridge, put it perhaps more clearly. Now we are all sons of bitches. And just like that, with the Trinity test, the atomic age had officially begun. Meanwhile, the teams working with Oppenheimer had successfully built two bombs, one based on uranium and the other based on plutonium, an artificial element derived from uranium. Their names would be written into the pages of history forever. The uranium bomb was called Little Boy. The plutonium bomb was called Fat Man. Both bombs were designed at Los Alamos under Oppenheimer's leadership, and these weapons would become America's most important strategy for ending the Second World War. Meanwhile, Germany was suffering devastating losses across Europe and was preparing to surrender. But America believed Japan would fight to the very end and was desperately searching for a way to end the war. On July 26, 1945, at the Potsdam Conference in the German city of Potsdam, now under Allied control, the United States issued an ultimatum to Japan, demanding the formation of a new, democratic, and peaceful government. The warning was clear: comply or face prompt and utter destruction. But under the terms of the ultimatum, the Japanese emperor would have to step down from his throne, and he saw no place for himself in the proposed future. Under these conditions, the emperor rejected the ultimatum. Harry Truman, who had become president following Roosevelt's death, had now been briefed on the Manhattan Project's success. The bombs were ready. Truman asked the project's leaders and military advisors a fateful question. Should the bomb be used? And if so, where should it be dropped? The American public, still burning with anger after the Pearl Harbor attack, was putting enormous pressure on the president to act. The project leaders concluded that using the bombs would end the war and save hundreds of thousands of lives. They decided it was the right choice for both Japan and America. Hiroshima was selected as the first target, chosen because of its population size and because no American prisoners of war were held there. They would use their limitless power to force Japan into surrender. And when August 6, 1945 arrived, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay released the atomic bomb called Little Boy over Hiroshima.
The moment the bomb detonated, the destruction, the scene, what happened? These were things that should have been impossible to witness. In all of human history, the word horrifying doesn't even begin to describe it.
Thousands of people. How do you even say it? They didn't just die. In an instant, people going to work, going to school, going to the market, children playing in parks. In a single instant, they were gone. It was as if they had simply evaporated. But apparently, that wasn't enough. Japan had not surrendered, and America had not given up. 3 days later, on August 9th, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. Together, the two bombs killed between 100,000 and 200,000 people, depending on the source. And we're not even counting the deaths from radiation sickness that followed, the hundreds of thousands of injured, or the psychological scars burned into an entire nation's memory. Japan, the day after the second bomb, acknowledged that it could no longer resist and announced its surrender. Setsuko Thurlow, born in Hiroshima, was only 13 years old at the time and just 2 kilometers from the epicenter of the blast. As one of the survivors, Setsuko described that moment in her own words.
First, an incredible bright light came through the window. Then, before I could understand what was happening, I found myself flying through the air. The building we were in had collapsed completely. All of my friends were crying out in pain, calling for their mothers. With one bomb, my entire life, everything I loved, an entire city, my childhood, all of it was gone. In 1 second.
And just like that, human history had been rewritten. Atomic physics was no longer just something on paper. This incredible energy was no longer just a theory. The destructive power of this energy, the same energy that would later elevate humanity, had now taken center stage. For the first time, science and society had collided on a stage this dramatic. In 1949, the Soviet Union joined the nuclear race, launching a rivalry with the United States that would form the very foundation of the Cold War. After this, the bombs would only get bigger and more devastating. Next in line was the hydrogen bomb. While the atomic bomb relies on splitting the atom, fission, the hydrogen bomb works on the opposite principle, fusing atoms together, fusion. And fusion produces vastly more energy with far less input. In 1952, the United States detonated the first hydrogen bomb, codenamed Mike, in the Marshall Islands of the Pacific. The resulting explosion was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
Less than a year later, the Soviet Union responded by detonating its own hydrogen bomb.
The world's superpowers were detonating their super bombs one after another in massive displays of power, while ordinary people watched in terror. Beyond the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb was seen as a true weapon of mass destruction, a force capable of annihilating all of humanity. In those days, rumors of a full-scale nuclear war that could truly destroy the entire world were circulating everywhere. At the same time, many civilian organizations were demanding nuclear arms control and working tirelessly toward it. By the 1980s, the world's nuclear arsenal had reached its absolute peak, but thanks to international treaties, that number has thankfully dropped significantly since then, and both production and testing have been brought under control. Now, let's flip the coin to the other side. In 1948, scientists discovered that nuclear fission in a reactor could be used to generate electricity. And by the 1950s, the first nuclear power plants began providing energy to the world.
Humanity had gained an incredible energy source, faster, safer, and more powerful than anything before. Until the new nuclear disasters arrived.
First, the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania in 1979. Then, Chernobyl in 1986. And finally, Fukushima in 2011.
In the wake of these disasters, massive public opposition to nuclear energy began to grow, despite all of its advantages. So, as you can see, humanity's history with nuclear physics has been incredibly turbulent.
Thanks to the many brilliant scientists we've celebrated on this channel, the developments we've witnessed over the past 100 years have been truly extraordinary.
But here's the thing we must never forget. Science itself is not to blame. The problem was never the scientific discoveries. The problem, as we've seen in every epic story, every legend, every film, lies in how humanity chooses to use the power it holds.
In the end, both the problem and the solution are us.
We'll be exploring this topic from many different angles, by the way, both philosophically and scientifically. We'll look more closely at Oppenheimer's contributions and conflicts, Richard Feynman's role, Albert Einstein's involvement and objections, their full parts in this incredible drama.
And as always, until we meet again, we're so glad you're here. Sending love.